The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, residents of Easton, friends and neighbors. This is Bill Ames, the co-host of the Film Connection. Proudly say that we've been on the air live here in Easton on ECAT since about the year 2000, so that's 23 years. And we like to bring you guests, interviews with guests of people who are involved in the media industry, hopefully ones who lived in Easton or nearby. And sometimes we do Zooms from all over the country. So it's an exciting world, media, and requires a lot of creativity, a lot of hard work. And it's nice to see these guys who produce these shows that we all love on Netflix and various other areas too. So this show would not be possible, without the hard work and dedication of my co-host, Priscilla Almquist-Olsen. Priscilla?
Hello, Bill. And today it gives me a great deal of pleasure because I'm interviewing Bill Ames. Bill Ames is the producer, director, and editor of the history of the Ames family. And today we're doing part 2 of the history of the Ames family. So introduce it a little bit and tell people, Bill, when did you do this? Because you're very young in this film.
Yeah, well, I started the first shots were done in the 1974, which is what, 50 years ago now, and with my little 8mm camera. And then, as I've said in the previous show, I went up to 16mm, which meant I could add a soundtrack, and I sort of got hooked on the whole thing. I was trying to tell the story of the Ames family in Easton and the growth of Easton and the shovel works and all that sort of thing. And so it was good in the sense that I was going to school to learn filmmaking, or to be comfortable with doing it, put it that way. So I have made, over the years, I'd say 50 or 60 other films, weddings, parties, trips, whatever, and edited them and set them to music. So it's been a fun hobby to me, and I owe it all to this first project, which was very ambitious, but that was a good thing.
Yeah, and it turned out really well. So let's roll it, the continuation, and we'll stop it at different points, and Bill can explain what it's about.
It was to Oakes' son, Oakes Ainger, that the primary responsibility fell for the works. Under his direction, and with the help of his brothers and cousins, the works prospered. Brother Frank took charge of the Canton branch. Oliver II became involved in politics and served several terms as governor. Oliver's son, Fred, remained involved with the shovel works as treasurer, continued the family's influence on the Union Pacific, and expanded it into other investments.
You're the president of the Union Pacific, Charles. What more do you want?
Control, Fred. I'm a figurehead, and you and the rest of the board know it.
We're pleased to have you with us. We listen to all your ideas.
Yes, and you and Gould make all the final decisions.
I hold no brief for Gould. I abhor both his tactics and goals.
Then why not get rid of him?
He's a powerful man.
With an odious reputation. The UP is not a toy, Fred. The future of this country lies with the railroads.
You know what the future of the railroads is on paper. Well, put it into action with the Union Pacific, and you will have success beyond your dreams. Nice to see you again, Mr. Adams.
The Union Pacific could become a vast system of interconnecting branch lines, spreading from Boston throughout the East.
I was going over the past. We're facing a crisis, Charles. Capital shrunk to nothing. Notes coming due.
I will replace Holcomb.
There's a young man in Boston I've had my eye on. Good family.
Charles, understand something. There is no surplus in Omaha. The Union Pacific faces bankruptcy. You face a personal loss of millions.
So why don't we stop it here, Adam? Yeah, so this introducing the, a little bit more about the next generation of Ameses. Old Oliver Ames, as we call him, came to Easton in about 1802, and he leased the shovel works on the shovel shop pond, as it says in the film. And he lived right on 46 Pond Street, which is where my brother Fred now lives. So it was he, and then later on, he had a bunch of children, two of whom, Oakes and Oliver Jr., were instrumental in working with him to create the shovel works and building the current shovel works, the location, which is now the Ames apartment complex, which we're all very familiar with. So it was really, that was really the troika for about 20 years there. And then as Oakes and Oliver had children, they began to get more involved in the business aspects of things, shovel works and whatever, because a lot of them were raised as teenagers to work in the shovel works. So that was a good test of how hard you work, and B, did you have a good personality or not? I mean, did the guys in the shop like you? If they didn't, you know, it was painfully obvious to the parents. So that happened in a couple of cases, but the four that passed the test were Oliver, who became the governor, Oakes Ainger. Oliver worked for the shovel works, and Oakes Ainger, who you've seen already, he was the gentleman, the man who took over the shovel works, became the CEO of the Ames Shovel Company. And then there was Frank Morton Ames, who was Oakes Ainger Ames's younger brother, and he took charge of a subsidiary that was located in Canton, Kingsley Iron Works, that they manufactured shovels and whatever. And then there was Frederick Lothrop Ames, and that was the fellow you saw in the last clip in the train car, and he was very instrumental in the Union Pacific Railroad, as you're going to find out. And it was quite a ride he had in the city of Boston and finance and all this sort of thing. And he's really the one, when we look at the Richardson buildings in a couple of minutes, he was the one that really paid for a lot of them and spearheaded their getting constructed, so that there was put the stamp on Easton, really, and indeed in the village of North Easton, of architecture that made the town, I guess famous is not too strong a word.
No, it isn't.
In this sense. So that they are the ones to whom we really owe tremendous amount of continuity and created for the town many institutions and so on and so forth. So Adam, why don't we keep it rolling here?
The late 1800s and early 1900s saw the peak of what was first developed on the Town River in Bridgewater. Or, with only slight exaggeration, what was originated on the banks of the Monocoy River. The factories were prospering, the Union Pacific completed, the Credit Mobilier in the past, and the current generation involved in the political and business affairs of the times.
When old Oliver first arrived in North Easton, he tied his horse to what was then a plank bridge, which has been replaced by what is known now as the Olmsted Bridge. He was surveying the land looking for properties to buy, and he bought the bankrupt Leonard Family Works, which was just below us down here. Today, 183 years later, we can see the changes. Behind us is the house built by his grandson, Oakes Ainger Ames, who managed the factories from the mid-1800s to the late 1800s. The Ames family made many gifts to the town. Here we see the Oakes Ames Memorial Hall, which was given by his children in memory of their father. When Oliver decided to devote all of his energies to shovel making, he built his factories of dressed granite, bound to endure through the years. He made it the rule of his life never to let an inferior tool leave his factory, and gradually his shovels became recognized as not only the best made in this country, but as superior to those imported from England. Old Oliver, besides starting the business, raising a family of 6 with his wife Susanna, and being the head of the local temperance chapter, was also the never-defeated town wrestling champion, as was his son, Oliver. The two once agreed to a match in secret. No one ever learned who was the victor.
The family arrived in
Stop
search.
it here. So that's an interesting section there. The last picture of old Oliver, again, as we called him, or the family called him back then, he arrived in Easton at Shovel Shop Pond and took the lease in 1802. But he had, interestingly, he had spent he spent 3 or 4 years in Springfield, at the Springfield Armory. I think it's mentioned in there. And what he learned there was a tremendous amount about, operating an iron foundry. His father, Captain John, was very active in West Bridgewater, and they had a very successful business there, but it was relatively small, although it was pretty successful, I guess. So his older brother, Oliver's older brother, Captain John's oldest son, got appointed to the Springfield Armory. I think it says it in there, or it's going to say it. And Oliver got the opportunity at age 18 to go out there and be an intern at the Springfield Armory. And that's where he learned about the mass production, because that's where they made rifles and all sorts of cannons such as they had in those days. So in order to make these weapons, you had to know about interchangeable parts and how to have a sort of a production line and that sort of thing. So Oliver spent 3 or 4 years there learning how to work on that production line and dealing with people like Samuel Colt and Eli Whitney and that sort of thing. And they were part of that diaspora, that community in the Springfield area, or the, what's the name of that river? Connecticut River Valley. Certainly Colt went on to great glory with his gun business, but that's how they learned it. And that's how Oliver learned it, and that's what he brought to him. When I was growing up, I thought that old Oliver was just sort of the younger brother who's sent off to seek his fortune in nearby Easton. Well, that was the case, but what I didn't realize till I got into it was how much he knew by the time he got there, because he had, as I said, he had gone to school for 3 or 4 years on all this and had tremendous connections in the business, leveraging certainly his father's. And that was really the heart and soul of what happened, was that Oliver came to Easton. He was well schooled in manufacturing, how to operate an iron foundry safely, how to use interchangeable parts, and he had a decent network growing it. So Easton was sort of not the Silicon Valley of Bristol County necessarily, but was certainly filled with foundries and things like that. The Leonard family in Taunton, very prominent. In fact, I think old Oliver leased that mill on Shovel Shop Pond was a Leonard family operation. So there was a lot of story behind the story, as in anything when you start looking into it. So Adam, let's keep rolling.
Of water, founded, and built their first homes near what they had developed. After old Oliver and his wife moved out of their house on Pond Street, they lived on Main with their children. Oakes continued to live in the same house, but Oliver built one of his own next door. Oakes' son, Oakes Ainger, went across the Queesit to build Queesit House, where, after his death, his son Winthrop lived. Winthrop's main interest was in the theater and produced plays on Broadway.
Adam, we can stop there. So that's an interesting place to stop right there. That's Winthrop Ames. who was the son of Oakes Ames, and he was just trying to remember whose son he was here. Oakes Anger's son. I'm sorry. But he, rather than get involved with the manufacturing of shovels and so forth, he had a great interest in the theater. When he went to college, he was involved in theatricals there. And he really picked up on it and went to Europe right after his graduation to sort of visit entrepreneurs there who put on plays and whatever, and it ended up in New York City, where he was very active producing plays and became quite successful. And as part of the Easton 300 celebration, they're going to be showing, what is it, Snow White? Wasn't that the one in the, I think it's scheduled for June, when they will be showing this movie of Snow White that Winthrop produced, because he produced it in New York in a film. And that is, as Walt Disney says in his memoirs, that's what really fired him on, because he was a draftsman and artist and all that. But when he saw the film produced by Winthrop of Snow White, I think he sort of said that was his aha moment when he realized that was going to be his calling.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Walt Disney says it in his biography, autobiography.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So Winthrop was involved with all these lead players in the theater world in New York. But these names aren't familiar now, but George Arliss and Catherine Cornell and not Basil Rathbone, but Trevor Howard, and all these famous names. They were all part of his circle in which he dealt and produced plays and so on and so forth. So
now, isn't it true, Bill, that he produced over 200 plays and musicals?
Probably did, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You win a few, you lose a few,
Mm-hmm.
But what he did, the interesting thing that he did was he got involved in this big theater that was built by all these wealthy people who subscribed to it. It sat like 2,000 or 2,500 people because they thought bigger is better, and But Winthrop was asked to be the general manager by these people, and he was a general manager. And there are some very interesting memos saying that he wrote saying this thing is going to fail. We can't fill it enough so that it will make a profit at the end of the year. So he was dead right. So I think it only lasted about 2 or 3 years, but it was a good lesson to him into the economics of owning the theater. So he went and he built a theater on Broadway. It's now the Helen Hayes Theater, that had a capacity of 300. And he said to somebody, he said, "Listen, I'll build this little theater." I think it was called the Little Theater at that point, with 300 people, and I'll make more money than you do with your 2,000 seat theaters, because the economics are good and you get a halfway decent play, and plus a smaller theater is more intimate, so to speak. That must have been in there too. But he's a fascinating character, and really you saw a picture of him there standing on the porch with his brother Hobart at Thanksgiving. And he would come up to Northeastern in, I think it was May or June, bring up some of his friends from the theater world in New York, and they'd have like a week-long house party. And they used to put on plays, and they would work with the high school. He would be in communication during the year with the Oliver Ames High School. And they would plan to put on a production, and the most famous was Midsummer Night's Dream in 1916. And they had a couple of these Broadway people were there, and I think it was probably script assisted. I don't think they, you couldn't really get those people to, concentrate that much on a vacation, but they were obviously very talented. And they put on this play, and if you go, I think it was in the Garden, such as it was in those days, and if you go to Queeset House now, and you look under the main stairway, there is a long picture like this, and there are all the students from Oliver Ames High.
Really?
who participated in this play with the likes of George Arliss or Catherine Cornell or whatever, whoever they were. So it was quite something in our little town. It was like a town of 5,000 at that point.
Yeah,
Little community, tight little community.
And my mother grew up in that tight little community of 5,000.
Yeah.
So, and you know, and when I was growing up, it was only 6,000.
Yeah.
When you and I were growing up,
Yeah.
6,000. So we knew everybody. And today, the stage in the Quisa Gardens has been reconstituted. Part of the original stage is there in the center, and then they restored the rest of it. So,
Yeah.
and that's where I believe Catherine
Cornell
and George Arliss paraded about and acted their scenes for the benefit of Winthrop Ames. And isn't it true that he was sometimes the sole person in that audience?
Was that right?
I think so.
Well, I think they, you know, it was a day at the office for them. I mean, that was their business to do this stuff. So maybe, you know, for their own reasons, that maybe that they did it. Yeah. And I don't know exactly what the layout was in the garden area there. I've often tried to think, but anyhow, there's some nice pictures. And Winthrop Ames was a well-documented character. There are books out that include a lot of passages about him and his life and so on and so forth. So that is a bit of a digression, but not really, because he was an extraordinary guy. And he showed that out of the community of north of Easton came a Broadway producer.
Right.
So that was very nice, besides all the shovels, something else came out. Okay, Adam, let's roll it.
Oliver II, the governor, built across the shovel shop pond from his grandfather's Pond Street house. His youngest son, Oakes, built borderland and inherited his father's interest in horticulture. He became a professor of botany at Harvard and one of the country's foremost orchid collectors. His wife, Blanche, illustrated his books and in her spare time supervised the construction of borderland.
So let's stop it here, Adam. Yeah, so that's the famous Oakes and Blanche of borderland fame. They built the borderland house, and we produced a film 5 or 6 years ago. Kevin Friend was the spearhead of it in terms of the editing, and Kate Kleiss wrote the script and narrated it. But they were very talented too, and Blanche was very involved in women's suffrage, and Oakes was an academic, worked for Harvard and was a professor of botany, and occupied a significant place in the sort of the continuum, which ends up now in the biotech world.
Right, and Blanche, of course, she was an extraordinary artist, portrait artist, and she also made cartoons for the suffragette movement, was really big on that.
That's what really separated Blanche out from the rest of them.
And she was president of the Massachusetts Suffragette Society or Association, whatever it was called back then.
Yeah,
right?
And she started the Birth Control League of Massachusetts. So, I don't know if she started, but she was the president of it for many years, and was very active at Borderland, where they had meetings and that sort of thing, planning for what became, and I think it was that amendment that they passed in 1917, the 19th Amendment, I think it was, which enabled, I don't know what the right wording is, but it was all about women's right to vote, in a positive sense. So there, Ginny Murray and some others are, as we speak, up at Borderland, transcribing the diaries of Oakes Ames. And it's quite interesting. Oakes was sort of a standoffish guy, he wasn't sort of Mr. Conversation. But you read his diaries, and it's one of these ironic things that the diaries are very heartfelt, and but he'd talk about their daily life and what Blanche was feeling and all this sort of thing.
Really?
Yeah, and it was it's quite astounding. And he had the most amazing handwriting. It was very small, and it was very easy to read. But it was right along the line. You know, the rest of us, we have these big letters and everything, but Oakes being Oakes, he made it small, so I guess he could write fast. But they're very fascinating, if you're into this, of course, insights into their life.
And he was quite well known for his orchid hybrids, right?
That's right. That's what he specialized in at Harvard, was the research on orchids. And orchids are I can't think of the right terms, but are fascinating to study because they have all sorts of pedigree going way back, and I don't know the right words, but you know, plant speak. But you know, it was a full day of work for him, and he obviously enjoyed it. So anyhow, there's a film out, as I said, that we made, and you can see that here locally. Okay, Adam.
Oakes is only brother
there. So that's Villa Balbianello. You may be wondering, now, why is a Villa Balbianello in there? Villa Balbianello is located in Lake Como, as many of us know because of the connection. Traveled in Europe, we've seen it. And Blanche's family, I think it was her brother, bought it right after the First World War when it was in tough shape. You know, it was sort of like, or those plundering and buying at cheap prices. So he got it very cheap, and it's an old monastery that goes way, way back to almost to Roman days, and the different buildings. And it was converted into a house, and Butler Ames, her brother, had been he was a congressman from Lowell, and he had been taking a vacation on Lake Como, and he was in a boat going up and down Lake Como, and he spied this Villa Balbianello, which is on this point of land, and it's it's not a huge building, but it's a series of buildings and walkways and terraces and stuff. It's quite famous. And he was fascinated by it, and he was told that, well, it's all boarded up now because this woman, the richest woman in Europe who lived in Paris apparently, owned it, but her husband died, and she was very sad, and they had great times there, so she had the whole thing boarded up and lived in Paris. And he told somebody, he said, listen, if that, who was involved in real estate in Europe, he said, listen, if that's ever for sale, let me know. And by gosh, a year or two later, he got a telegram from this fellow who said Villa Balbianello is indeed for sale, because I guess the woman died. So he bought it on the spot, and obviously I'm sure, well, it was real money, of course, but it was not a big price given what he got. And they fixed it up, and it was I was lucky enough to have spent a week there myself. So it was it's been in James Bond, one of the latest James Bond movies. There's a whole couple of scenes.
Really?
James Bond is sitting on the terrace, talking the talk with some Russian agent or something, and you can see in the background, you can see the hills of northern Italy, and they have scenes of the Villa Balbianello. So that the family, Oakes, Blanche's family, it wasn't to do with my particular Ames family, but they finally sold it because no one was really that interested or prepared to spend the money.
Well, let's also let the viewers know that Blanche Ames was her name because she was born into an Ames family, not related to the Easton Ameses, but then married Oakes Ames of Easton, and so she never had a name change.
That's right.
So when you talk about her brother Butler Ames,
every woman's dream, right?
Exactly. All the monogram towels don't need to be changed.
You don't have to change, right, right. Yeah, her brother was Oakes's close friend and I think roommate at Harvard.
Oh,
So that's how it, as it so often the case, he was in these situations. Oakes was invited out for Sunday lunch at Blanche's house, and Blanche was probably 17 or something then. And there was real chemistry between them because they were all very sort of intellectual. I mean, they were fun people and sports people, but they loved books and everything. And Blythe, I'm sure that's what Blanche. But anyhow, that's
so that's how they met.
That's how they met. Yeah, so it was a nice family type connection.
Right.
You know. So I think that does it. Adam, should we keep going?
Will built Spring Hill near the shovel works, in which he was active for his entire business career. At one point, feeling frustrated by his cousins and feeling he could build a better shovel, he erected factories of his own in Easton to prove it, which the family nicknamed Will's Spite Shop. His chief doubter was probably his first cousin Hobart, who had inherited control of the shovel works from his father, Oakes Ainger. Besides being president of the company, his chief interest was his plantation in Tennessee, Grand Junction.
So Jack, can we stop it here? Yeah, that's the Hobart Ames. He was the one who inherited the CEO position of the shovel company from his father, Oakes Ainger. And Oakes was a very smart guy and all that, but he was not particularly focused on the shovel works. So he had a big plantation in Tennessee, and he liked to go hunting and shooting and all this sort of thing. But it all turned out well, ironically, because he had several highly talented senior employees who knew how to keep the flock flying straight and the shovels coming out. So maybe it was a good thing he was off hunting and shooting. I mean, he was a very popular guy and a smart guy, but he just had other interests. And he has this plantation down in Tennessee, which many of us have visited Memphis, called Grand Junction. It's at Grand Junction. It's called the Ames Plantation. And that's where Hobart was very interested in upland game shooting. And, you know, what you do with horses and dogs, and the birds fly up and you shoot them like that. So Hobart got a big kick out of that. And so they created the National Bird Trials, hunting trials. I forget the actual name. And to this day, that's where it's held every year on that plantation. And so it's got a lasting fame, what he did. And anyhow, let's keep going.
Of the houses in North Easton, Langwater best symbolizes the family's evolution. Started in 1854, it grew steadily as family fortunes rose. Fred Ames created it and brought it through many different architectural styles. At Langwater, he started what became under his sons an all-encompassing avocation of raising Guernsey cattle.
So that's my grandfather in there checking the udders of the cows to make sure that everything's okay, you know. So they had quite a nice Guernsey herd that was founded by my grandfather's father, Fred Ames, and continued on down through my grandfather's older brother, Fred Ames, or Lothrop Ames rather, who had it up what's known as Stonehill. My great uncle Lothrop, built the big house at Stonehill, and he had a big Langwater cattle herd that he'd taken over after his father died. And when Lothrop died, then my grandfather took it over. And my grandmother was really the one who had the business sense. I mean, my grandfather certainly knew about business and that sort of thing, but he was much more interested in flowers and breeding flowers. And they had all those, they had greenhouses up there. But my grandmother, to her great credit, liked checking the books and making sure they were making money and that everything was clean in the milking world. And I'm very proud to say that my grandmother was, for 50 years, was a member of the Easton Grange.
Now, what was her name?
Nancy. Nancy Philly was what she was born as. And I am a member of the Easton Grange, as are you, Priscilla.
Right.
So I like to I like to think that you know, there's some continuity here, and the Grange nowadays is quite prospering, thanks to Lee Williams, the famous one and only Lee Williams. He sort of rescued the whole thing, and now, of course, the Lions thrift store is in the Grange building.
Which was Avery Lee Williams' idea.
Absolutely, and Don Tuck, of course, should be mentioned immediately in that
Don
context as well. And I'm sure there's one or two others who are sort of the key group. But it's been a real success, and the Lions Club and the Grange cooperate, and the Lions Club volunteers do a great job up there, and we, as the Grange, we get a share of what money they make, and all that money, most of it rather, is put into fixing up the building, as
Yes.
you know.
So we have a whole new electrical system, new windows, new roof, plumbing, insulation, a lot.
Yeah, it's been a lot of work's gone into it, but it's been a solid success.
Right. And it is on the historic places, isn't it? Is it the state as well as the federal?
I don't think it's the federal.
Just the state.
It's the state, yeah. So they getting back to the Guernsey herd, that, I think the final cow sale, the dispersal sale, as they called it, was in 1958 after my grandfather died. My grandmother was too much for her to do alone. And so they had a big dispersal sale here and sold all the cows and the bulls. And they had these enormous Guernsey bulls they had a bull pen. I forget the guy's name who was the fellow who was in charge of it. But these Guernsey bulls were impressive.
Well, my mother's first cousin, Hazel Nagel, I'm trying to think of
Joe
her.
Nagel.
Joe Nagel was her husband, and he was the head herdsman.
That's probably him I'm trying to think of.
Yeah, probably. And Joe was always the one who had to be present at the birth of the calves.
Right, yeah.
Also, but he was the guy in charge.
Yeah. So there's some.
And her maiden name was Bengston, Hazel Bengston Nagel, and her mother Albertina was my grandmother's sister.
Oh wow! So that would be a Swedish name, Bengston.
Yes,
right?
It was, and her father was Adolf Bengston.
Oh yeah.
But he went. Somehow they changed it here to Benson.
Yeah, is that right?
So he was, yeah.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so the Grange prospers, and the cows
and let
got
me
sold.
mention one more thing. You talked about that dispersal auction.
Yeah.
But weren't there auctions before that where they sold bulls and cows?
Oh yeah, they as I understand it, you had to declare a profit every 5 years. I think it had something to do with the IRS.
Mm-hmm.
So when you sold my grandmother sold a lot of the cows and bulls and whatever, they could declare a profit.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, they were indeed a business.
I
It
see.
wasn't just a luxury thing that they were
Right.
taking advantage of the tax laws for.
Right. So they could make itemized deductions.
Yeah. So they could declare a profit, say this is indeed a business, and
Right.
we're in.
Well, as a child, I remember going to one of those auctions, and I grew up on Seaver Street, where I still live, and I go through the woods down to sheep pasture, and past the barn,
Yeah.
or in front of the barn, actually the side of the barn, and there was, I can still remember sitting on the grass and the auctioneer up there with his big gavel, and then one of the employees would come out with a cow or a bull, and people would
Sure.
vote. They would
Bid.
yeah, and the auction was on, and I remember, and this had to be in the 50s sometime, and I remember one bull sold for $18,000.
That was a lot.
Oh my God! I mean, my dad was making $3,500 a year.
Yeah.
And this bull is selling for $18,000. So that bull had to have sired some wonderful milk producing cows.
Sure. Certainly. I mean, they all did the numbers, and they knew. And they had these sales, and this is sort of a funny story. One of the other breeders of these Guernsey cattle was J.C. Penney, the fellow who started J.C. Penney and all that. And so the story was that J.C. Penney they were good friends of my grandparents or my great uncle, whatever. I mean, they, were sort of business friends, but they were friends because they were in the same business, so they'd see each other and whatever. And J.C. Penney was raised on a farm in Missouri, so he had this lingering love of cows and animals and things like that. So he makes a lot of money and buys a cow herd and whatever and starts breeding them as his hobby. And so J.C. Penney comes to one of these sales, I think it was the 1920s, and to buy cattle, and he's invited up to Langwater for dinner with a bunch of others, and they have a big long table. And J.C. Penney is sort of sitting in the middle, and J.C. Penney, of course, being who he was used to sort of dominating a room. When J.C. Penney talked, people listened. Because he was entitled and, he was a huge success. So.
Yeah.
So J.C. Penney, the story I heard was that J.C. Penney starts talking in the middle of about his early life. So he sort of captured everybody's attention, sort of taking over, So he started going, oh yeah, I started, a young boy, and I used to sweep the hardware store, and a lot of times I had to spend the night under the table or something to get up early to go do it, and then I had to go milk the cows, and so on, going on and on. So my grandmother was at the other end of the table, and she sort of, Mr. Penney paused for a second. My grandmother chipped in and said, well, really, Mr. Penney, I think we've all heard quite enough. And they all knew each other.
Right.
So Penny was not totally insulted by it. In fact,
no, right.
In fact, I met a man, interestingly, who worked for J.C. Penney when I was in the business world, and he was much older than me. And he said, as a young guy, and because I introduced myself, I said, my name is Bill Ames. He said, oh, Ames, are you part of the family that was involved with the Guernsey herds? And I said, yeah. And he said, yeah, I worked for J.C. Penney. And he used to tell me the story about when he went to the Ameses for dinner. And so the source of the story was not my family. The source of that story was J.C. Penney. And this fellow said that J.C. Penney loved to tell it because he knew he talked too much. He couldn't help himself. So this was a way, according to this guy, J.C. Penney could make fun of himself. Yeah. Because he was self-deprecating.
Self-deprecating man.
And he said he heard J.C. Penney tell the story. Really, Mr. Penney, I think we've heard quite enough. So all his employees roar with laughter. But anyhow, so that judged by the source, that was a good source. It was, anyhow, so I think we've about done the cattle. So I think we can move on, Jack.
Perhaps Langwater's greatest legacy, the lodge, derived from a friendship of Fred Ames's with the architect H.H. Richardson. Along with Frederick Law Olmsted, the two gave the family in North Easton a lasting monument.
The Ames family invited Frederick Law Olmsted to join H.H. Richardson in embellishing the town. Richardson symbolized the feudal power of his patrons, who made a fortune manufacturing shovels. The Ames family first built an arcaded town hall. In Richardson, the local squires had found the right architect for their medieval dream. The Northeastern Public Library is a tough, Romanesque design, a sanctuary of books. Its low-sprung archway is a powerful prelude to an interior glowing with golden light. A barrel vault made of polished butternut crowns the basilical hall. The side aisles are lined with books. Frederick Ames commissioned Richardson to design a gate lodge for his estate. Orange tile roofs gather together the complex mass, while Richardson's characteristic sleepy-eyed dormers wink at the garden. The building has an anthropomorphic presence. Large, rough boulders make the building look as if it were an accident of geology, left by the glaciers. The lodge was the gateway to Ames's private world. He also paid
Let's
for
stop
the...
it here, Jack. So that's the piece on H.H. Richardson and Langwater. My uncle Oliver Ames and his wife Esther, and now their 4 children, have been the stewards of the Langwater estate for many, many years now, and do a great job. A very valuable piece of history in the town, of course, and the Gate Lodge is emblematic of Richardson's great contributions to our town and to the nation. So I think the origin of the Richardson coming to Easton was because of Frederick Lothrop Ames. And I think they sort of had mutual friends in college and so on and so forth. So let's keep going.
Well, I would like to make a comment here because we have to remember that architects and architectural students come from all over the world to Northeastern to see 5 examples of Henry Hobson Richardson buildings. Now, everybody knows about Trinity Church in Boston, but maybe many Easternites don't realize that Easton has the most Henry Hobson Richardson buildings than any other place on the planet.
That's very true. Certainly, as a small town, which we are, basically,
right?
It's extraordinary.
It is.
So they come here. So Stanford White's a name you might recognize. He worked for H.H. Richardson, and he designed that barrel vault room you saw with the oak staves and the balcony, the walkway there with Muriel Blaisdell. So anyhow, let's keep moving. Thank you.
Public gateway to the town, the railroad station.
Fred's second son, Lothrop, built Stone Hill and expanded his father's dairy cow interest into the country's first Guernsey herd. Lothrop's only son, Freddie, started an air charter business and flying school. His daughter, Sally, as did her father, became an ardent ocean racer. Lothrop's older brother, Oliver, carried on their father's business interests and built his house sheep pasture across from Lothrop's Stone Hill. His oldest daughter, Elise, married William A. Parker and has lived her entire life in North Easton. His son, Oliver Jr., was killed in World War I, an action for which he received the Distinguished Service Cross.
It's from headquarters. Air reconnaissance reports an enemy patrol moving out to occupy the far edge of the Coley Woods. We'll send out a patrol, intercept them, and bring in prisoners.
Very good, sir.
No, not you yet. Lieutenant Ames and I will go forward and size them up. You'll follow up with the patrol.
Yes.
I need 10 men to follow up with Sergeant Kilmer. It's a dangerous mission.
What's the matter with you? They're all killed up there. Donovan Ames, all of them.
And you're the only survivor?
Yeah.
After Fred Ames's death, his daughter Mary moved across from the lodge, where she built her house wayside. She later married Congressman Louis A. Frothingham. Her younger brother, John, continued to live in Langwater for the rest of his life. His three sons, John Jr., Oliver, and David, brought up their families on land in North Easton. Over the years, the family's interest in metal bending had put them near or in bankruptcy at least 3 times. William on the Montequoy, Oliver Sr. in the post-revolutionary days, and Oakes and Oliver during Union Pacific's construction. These experiences, plus that of the Credit Mobilier, built a strong bond for all in North Easton, family, workers, and townspeople. When Oliver Jr. died in 1877, the men from the shovel shops came to his house on Main Street and carried him on their shoulders to Unity Church, then to the cemetery and his grave. After the turn of the century, the seemingly inevitable problems of prosperity in a family-owned business began to take hold. The works could not keep up with the times and were eventually sold. At their peak, they were the largest of their kind in the world. Unity Church best illustrates that former era. Built nearly 100 years ago and given by Oliver Ames, Jr., it was designed by his cousin, John Ames Mitchell.
Let's stop it here for a second. So this marks my debut as a singer. You'll notice the soprano in here who sings "Morning is Broken" like the first dawn, you know, that morning is broken. And you'll notice that at some point another voice enters to sing the chorus with her, and that is me.
Really?
It was supposed to be more, but I couldn't keep on tune with her. And the only piece of what you're going to hear is where I'm singing with her is the only section that I could stay on key for. But I was very proud of that. So anyhow, go ahead.
Morning has broken.
Because while we have been looking back, the story still goes on. It is as difficult to end this film as it was to establish a clear-cut beginning. So again, we shall let Winthrop do the work for us.
Moreover, I think you will find the lives of these first Ameses reflect the early history of your country, its pioneer settlers and their brave hardihood, the war for independence, the birth and shaping of the first democracy, its sudden rise into a commercial world power, and its spread from the Atlantic seaboard across a continent.
So I think this is a good place to end it. Comes after that is a aerial shot and some more singing and a reunion and so forth. So, but it's been a real pleasure to relive this journey of filmmaking of mine.
Yeah.
So thank you for the opportunity to share it with everybody. I
Yeah.
have not watched this quite so closely for many, many years. So
Yeah.
it's been a pleasure for me.
So finally, what was the biggest challenge?
Well, just learning how to do it and just keeping at it, getting those film clips, you know, about the Oliver Ames and the war and Union Pacific, and suddenly, you know, years later it would dawn on me that there had to be a film. So
this was your baptism by fire.
Yeah.
And so since then, though, all these many, many years, 50 years later, you are still practicing your craft, and you're still illuminating some wonderful films that we talk about quite often on this show. And also, you're able to question and analyze the people that we introduce to the public in this program, because you have such wonderful knowledge of the craft and what they are doing, whether they're producer, a director, screenwriter, or editor. You've done it all. Thank you, Bill Ames.
It's been a great pleasure, and thank you for giving me the airtime.
You're very welcome. And until next time, Priscilla Almquist-Olsen and
Bill Ames
welcome you back to the next production of Film Connection. Please stay connected. Thank you.